Welcome back to the TYT Earth Day special, everyone. Very excited to welcome onto the special someone who I just love talking about the environment, about politics, about, how we can get to where we need to be. The co-founder and executive director of the Sunrise Movement, Varshini Prakash. Welcome back to the network.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. You actually took part in our Earth Day special last year. You submitted a video. You were on the road. I think you might have been doing your travels to California at that point.
Yeah,
But thank you for showing up 2 years running. I think it might be a record at this point.
absolutely. Yeah, I know. We were on the road for the Road to the Green New Deal tour. I think I was calling you somewhere in on the way to Detroit or something like that.
That might be. So the very different situation this year.
Yeah.
Not doing a lot of road trips lately.
hmm
So considering the lockdown and everything like that, how are you staying environmentally conscious, or is that something that you even have headspace for? Is it easier? Is it harder considering what's going on?
I mean, I'm not going literally anywhere. So, in terms of any carbon consumption, I'd say that's down quite a bit. But I think the way that we're actually thinking about it is how is Sunrise engaging actively at the federal level to make sure that we are supporting relief efforts around coronavirus and making sure that workers are protected um, and that people have benefits during this time. But at the same time, also, how are we thinking about the long term and ensuring that we haven't paused the clock on the climate crisis. It continues to be an issue that we have to think about. And now we're even further behind potentially because of the existing coronavirus. And so how are the trillion-dollar stimulus packages that are coming out? How are the long-term recovery efforts actually getting us closer to solving the climate crisis too?
So let's talk about Sunrise Movement. So we've entered in this time where, in-person organizing, canvassing, that sort of stuff is going to be harder. Any sort of protest action in person is going to be much harder. So how is the organization adapting to the way things are?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a hit just to not be able to gather with your people. But the thing about young people is that we are able to, our lives are already online and we're able to form and keep pretty strong digital relationships. So we have moved our entire mass training program online and we've been able to train about 9,000 people in the last 3 weeks.
Wow.
In basic organizing skills, movement building skills, political education about the Green New Deal and how it relates to the coronavirus crisis. And we really see this moment as we know we're going to get out of social distancing at some point. We have to have a movement that is educated and ready to go in that moment to come out guns blazing. And we're seeing this as one of those opportunities.
I'm curious, in terms of assuming we ever get out of this, which I still have some small hope that eventually we will, one of the things I've been thinking about is this has been a sort of disruption to everybody's life in a way that we've never experienced before.
Right.
And we know that, when we talk about some of the changes that would be necessary to combat climate change in the future, it is going to require some changes to our life. So do you think that the experience that people are having right now and the willingness of the vast majority of Americans to go along with it, to safeguard their lives and the lives of others, does that give you hope that eventually they can be persuaded, that individually or that the government can be persuaded to make the sort of changes that are necessary in this other area, in the climate area?
Yeah, I think they'll have to if we're going to solve the problem. I think when you look back at American history, it's at many of these critical junctures in time, people have really thrown down collectively and in large part aided by the federal government. We saw during World War II how people would produce in their own windowsills and gardens outside their house these victory gardens that produced tons and tons and tons of food to aid in the war effort. We saw how the efforts in the New Deal 100 years ago were able to put millions, tens of millions of people back to work to reboot the economy and ensure that economic prosperity for all. And so I think in this moment, I'm actually kind of amazed to see how people are actually in the process of practicing social distancing are saying we're here to protect some people in our community for the benefit of all of us, and we're ready to take that sort of sacrifice. I think, in terms of the climate crisis, the changes that we have to make that are on a mass scale actually improve our lives considerably. And I don't think it's just a sacrifice. I actually think it's about improving air quality, ensuring we have job creation, stopping the impending end of human civilization, which I think we should all be into.
A little thing like that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Man, a little bit of hope. That's good. And I whenever a high profile figure in media and politics these days is like saying, let's send people back to work. What if you lose 3% of the population, whatever? I have to cover that, but I try to focus on the fact that these are outliers, and the vast majority of people are being very responsible.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you're focusing on that as well.
Yeah.
So in the near term, in terms of climate activism, in terms of influencing politicians, we've had some recent developments in the Democratic primary where the candidate that scored the best in terms of the Sunrise Movement's presidential candidate scorecard on the environment, Bernie Sanders, he is now out. The candidate who looks like he's going to be the nominee, Joe Biden, got less than half the points that Bernie did on that scorecard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did you feel when it happened, and what are some of your thoughts about the possibility of influencing Joe Biden in this area?
Yeah, I mean, when we were looking at the results of Super Tuesday and the subsequent elections after that in Michigan and other states, it became pretty abundantly clear that there is a strong generational divide in this country. People who are under the age of 45 seem to vote overwhelmingly for Bernie Sanders, and people who are over the age of 45 seem to vote pretty overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden, who is now the presumptive Democratic nominee, I think wants to put together the winning coalition that is going to pave the way to the White House, because we know we all need to get Donald Trump out of the White House for the future of American democracy and the future of this planet, I think it is clear that Joe Biden needs to find a way to excite and energize young voters. And so we actually collectively with United We Dream, which is an immigration justice organization, the Dream Defenders, who work on the school to prison pipeline and criminal justice reform, and March for Our Lives, which works to prevent gun violence, and several other organizations, actually sent a letter to Joe Biden to say, these are some of the things that we need you to do to get our bases of young people excited about your campaign so that we can collectively work to defeat Donald Trump in November.
Yeah. And I was very glad when I saw that. You all, a number of organizations responded very quickly, and it's so important that you do that. And my fingers are definitely crossed that he takes your advice.
Yeah, me too.
For the sake of us and the country, but also for himself, because all these moves are not only the right choice, the moral choice, but they're the pragmatic choice if you want to get elected.
Exactly. You're not going to win without young people in 2020.
Exactly.
Young people, as in people under 45.
Exactly. Yes.
It's a pretty wide.
Hey, I'm still young.
Yes.
Yeah. That's okay. That's a positive note. Varshini, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Love your work at Sunrise and your advocacy. It gives me hope. And thank you for being here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.